across the country in the deeper recesses of Greater Masaka. We also have issues to do with cattle rustling in Karamoja. And this evening we'll be hosting the ICT Minister, Chris Bariomusi, who is also the Kinkizi East Member of Parliament. But we shall also be discussing other issues, including the issue of vaccinations in the country and the schools reopening. Welcome to this program. You're on Citizen Voices, and our hashtag is Amplifying Citizen Voices. I'm your host, Emmanuel Mutaiziwa. So we'll delve into the issues. Honorable, we are aware that you've made arrests, and there's been lots of controversy in regard to the arrests of two members of parliament. That is Mr. Alan Sewanyana, Honorable Alan Sewanyana, and Honorable Mohamed Segirinya. But the question out there is, if you've got evidence, if you've got the smoking gun, why don't you parade these guys before the courts of law and you present this evidence? Why, for instance, did you detain Honorable Sewanyana after he had been granted bail? Where's the rule of law in this regard?
Thank you very much, Ima. I am happy to be hosted here on NTV once again, and thank you for this time. Yes, Masaka. Well, first of all, those cases are before court, so we restrain ourselves going into details, otherwise we shall offend the rule on sub judice. But yes, Ugandans know there was a spate of murders in the last few months in the Greater Masaka region, where criminals were invading villages and harming innocent people, killing innocent people, targeting all the women and men and the people who are living alone in houses, and all those sad memories are in the minds of Ugandans. That was in the months of July and the larger part of August, and I want to appreciate and thank the security forces for having prevailed over the situation, and the investigations are ongoing. Now, the murders have been quelled, and in the course of investigations, many people, many suspects have been arrested. Unfortunately, the suspects include political leaders, like the two members of parliament that you have mentioned. And their names came through interrogation of the suspects, the people who were involved in the killings in Masaka. Definitely nobody is above the law. If the investigations point to an individual, even if they point to me, then the police and security agencies are duty bound to get statements from me. So it was in that regard that the two members of parliament were requested by police to register statements, and then they were apprehended. So investigations are still going on, and definitely the court process will start, but it started when they appeared in the court. The court has started, and the time will be fixed when the prosecution will take its course. And therefore, let's wait for the people who are doing investigations to conclude their investigations, and they will be able to adduce evidence in court. If it is strong enough, then the prosecution will carry the day. If it is weak, maybe the members of parliament and the other suspects are acquitted. But the good thing that once most of these suspects were apprehended, the killings have come down, and security and indeed the state will get to the bottom of the matter, because these were senseless deaths. Even if you disagree with the government or for whatever reason, why do you go to kill innocent people who have very little to do with the government? Just all the women, all the men, people who are just struggling on their own in the villages, and then you kill them. It's very unfortunate, and let's wait for the investigative team to produce the evidence which they will bring in court, and then we'll see how it goes. On the issue of the rearrest of the Member of Parliament, of course, if you are granted bail, that does not give you immunity that you cannot be arrested again. It depends on the kind of information that the security and investigative officers have. Probably in this case, they had new information which required them to get the Member of Parliament again, but I'm sure he will still go through the court process. So you are saying where the rule of law, it's there. I mean, if investigators are doing their work and the course of the investigations, information points to individuals, including members of parliament, and they are invited to give statements, they are arrested and produced in court, isn't that the rule of law? If one of them had been shot or killed in the police cells or in the prison, then you'd raise the issue of rule of law. But the state is following the laid down principles. And
the right to bail is a constitutional right.
Yes.
You are aware of that or not?
I am very much aware.
So if courts of law grant an individual bail, why do you go ahead and apprehend him? And then two, you seem to be putting the cart before the horse, and it's quite a trend. Why do you arrest someone before you complete investigations? I thought it should be the other way around, that you conduct investigations, you gather your evidence, and then you arraign whoever you think is a suspect.
Well,
before the courts of law have him charged and have your smoking gun so that you can prove
in a situation like
all this cogent evidence that these are the people behind these attacks.
In a situation like Masaka where people are being killed, if there is a strong suspicion against an individual, would you say the investigators should go on investigating as more people are killed until when you complete? I think the logic would also dictate that arrest also helps in cutting off the further commitment of crime. Provided when you arrest somebody, then you remain within the law, the 48 hours, you produce the person in the court, which has been the case, I think, in this situation. So I think it was proper that if there is information to show that you, Imam Tezibga, you are collaborating with the killers, and indeed the killing is taking place, and there is information, if you are, even the penal code provides for preventive arrest. If, for instance, in the opinion of police, you are about to commit a crime tonight, police has the authority under the law to arrest you for preventive purposes. But in this case of where the murders were taking place in Masaka, I think it's still proper from a logical point of view that if there is a network of people who are involved or suspected to be involved in the murders, then arresting them also helps in arresting the murders which are going on, provided you are arrested and put in the gazetted areas, and then you follow the law that in 48 hours you are produced in the court, and the due process is initiated. But I'm sure the investigation will be completed soon. So
in essence, you portray these very exceptional circumstances, that perhaps these are people who are involved in, for instance, terrorist activities. So if you find someone, if there's someone, a politician, who is scheming with individuals to make, for instance, improvised explosive devices, you can't wait. You need to nip that in the bud.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely,
as you are aware, given institutional memory, there's been a lot of political undertones in regard to issues of this kind. Massacre, greater massacre, which has been won over by the opposition, and you start making these allegations. We've had history where Kizza Besigye, for instance, who's been largely the doyen of opposition politics in this country, has been charged, and there's been no evidence whatsoever. I think one of the judges, Justice John Bosco Katusi, said the evidence could not even prosecute a chicken thief. So there's that suspicion that usually you get into these cases and it's simply politics. At the end of the day, are we going to see this evidence in courts of law that's going to lead to show that these two honorable members of parliament were involved in these grisly attacks, were the ones coordinating these machete-wielding militias or whatever we call them? Are we going to see a footprint of perhaps phones and all these kind of things, than merely basing this on allegations?
Well, sometimes our investigators also do a poor job. They don't gather sufficient evidence. But at least what you and I agree that happened is that the people were killed in massacre. The murders were there. And the police and the investigators are finding out who is behind these murders. And I'm sure the wider public in Uganda is interested in knowing who exactly is behind these murders. And some suspects have already been netted. Now, it will depend on the evidence that is adduced by police and the investigators to convince court. Sometimes the evidence might get weak, maybe if the investigators don't do a thorough job. But we hope in this case they have sufficient evidence.
Definitely.
Which they will bring.
The threshold is beyond reasonable doubt.
Reasonable doubt, yes. But it's not politics per se. In our case at the state, someone was even on another talk show, another media house was saying, why are you targeting NUP? And I was saying, no, NUP is not being targeted. I think the people involved or who were arrested as individuals, not because they are members of a political party, not because they are MPs. In any case, they are not the strongest and the most outspoken members of NUP as a party. If it was to be to target a party, maybe other senior leaders of the party would be the ones arrested. But I think the evidence that the investigators gathered pointed to these two individuals. So now the responsibility, the onus remains with the investigators to really bring that evidence to the public when the trials start in the courts of law, and we hope they have sufficient evidence.
When we are also aware that you're holding a number of people, and many of these people have not, been being kept in Gazette. They are being held incommunicado. Their relatives don't have access to them. Their lawyers don't have access to them. Their medical doctors don't have access to them. Why don't you follow what is laid out in the law? Why don't you hold these people in gazetted places and have their relatives?
What is your source of information to
it is public knowledge.
You mean the massacre incident?
Yes.
No, the people who are being apprehended?
Some, about 40, are being held in ungazetted areas.
Are you sure?
Yes, very sure.
How do you know?
I do know.
You are suspecting?
Yes. No, I'm not suspecting. I'm sure.
No, people who are arrested, there is no reason, for instance, to hide them. They are taken into detention centers, which are gazetted, particularly police stations. Police stations. How many people, do you know how many people have been apprehended with respect to the massacre, murders? Probably not.
I guess there are many, but that doesn't mean that you should hold them incommunicado. But anyway, have you up to now, as a government,
I can give the public that whoever has been arrested will be accounted for, and they will be produced in the courts of law, and the due process of the law will take place. At least you can rest assured that the NRM government does not arrest anybody and kill that person in detention, unless if he dies of natural causes and so forth. But it's not a policy of NRM government or the state to torture and kill people who are in detention. Because if you are suspected to have involved yourself in the murders, once the investigations are complete, then the trial will take place. So nobody should fear that maybe they could have arrested somebody, would be killed and never never be traced again? No, it won't happen.
Have you, as a government, established the motive behind these killings? Over 30 people in a span of a month in the deeper recesses of Greater Massacre, targeting the elderly and vulnerable, targeting poor people. What is the motive of these people who carried out these attacks?
Well, the information that we have so far, again, like you said, points to politics. Politics in the sense that, one of the greatest achievements of NRM has been peace and stability in the country. People will tell you that comparing the situation now to the past, now we sleep. You can sleep in your house and you are sure that tomorrow you will wake up without anybody killing you. You can have a talk show now, and from here you drive to Karamoja or Western Nile or Kisoro and you will reach safely. So there has been that security guaranteed by the NRM government. So there are those who think that if you destabilize the country through criminality and causing insecurity, where people fear to sleep in their houses, where people are not sure that when they enter their houses, they will live up to morning, then maybe it will bring a strong credibility issue to NRM, that the NRM can no longer say, we have brought you security. So there are those who think they can fight the NRM government through causing that kind of insecurity, so that people lose trust and confidence in the NRM system being able to protect them. Otherwise, how would you explain somebody just going to kill an old woman who is not part of government, who is not in the governance system, and they don't even steal anything from the houses? And the information also indicates people plotting all this were paying those criminals. We had reports where people killed even had money, and the killers could see the money, but they were not even taking the money, meaning they already facilitated to do that. So all of this will come out into the public.
We'll be waiting, but just perhaps to say that you talked about security and how it has been one of those great dividends by the NRM government, and I think I would say that what you say is partially correct, because as you're aware, we had an insurgency in the north that spanned for decades. We had the ADF in Kasese. We had an insurgency in northeastern Uganda as well. We had the rustlers disturbing the people in Teso and elsewhere. But
yes, but all those were defeated by the NRM.
Yeah, so definitely.
Because if you study the history of this country and the region, for the last 500 years, this has been the first time to have complete peace and stability in the country. From Karamoja to Kisoro, from Western Nile to Busia, the country is peaceful. So,
yeah, now to advance this debate, as you are aware now, we are getting pockets of instability in Karamoja, which to a large extent had been pacified, that people would move across the sub-region without fear. But now the rustlers are back. What exactly is the problem? We know that, for instance, the other side of the border, across the porous border, in Turkana, the ethnic community there had not yet been, was not disarmed. What exactly is the problem?
I think that's part of the problem, as you have indicated. At the times, the initiatives which we start on this side of the country in Uganda, at times equivalent initiatives are not started on the other side. In many areas, even if you look at the female genital mutilation, you find the Ugandan side of Karamoja and Sebei, we put intensive efforts, but then on the other side, the efforts are not as strong. And when the season comes, people who circumcise the females who circumcise run the other side. So the same with the security in Karamoja, that Uganda has been doing a lot to ensure that we pacify the Karamoja region. You recall there was even an exercise to disarm the Karamojong, but the moment you leave the other side of Turkana, armed and we don't manage the border as well, then there is that spillover from that side. So it's unfortunate that we got cases of cattle rustling coming up again, but the security apparatus has already been heightened, and this is going to be controlled. So these are just the local criminals. You cannot call it insecurity in the sense that anybody is fighting government, but just localized insecurity and criminality, especially occasioned by the cattle rustling. And the Karamoja region, you know, there are different clans, and one clan can go to raid the other, and then the other raids the other, but the security system of government is going to contain this issue, but also government is engaging our counterparts in the Kenyan side to see that the region can be pacified, both on the side of Uganda, but also on the side of Kenya. So our people in Karamoja and the surrounding areas should not worry a lot. I think this will be contained sooner than later.
Yeah, Honorable, perhaps do you believe that the approach of pacification of Karamoja is a little bit inadequate? You're taking away the guns, you want people to cease living through the old primordial way of living and rustling. Have you been able to provide alternatives? This is a sub-region which is quite rich in mineral wealth. There's marble, there's iron ore and everything else. What are the alternatives you're giving to these communities so that you come to them and you say, well, we are taking away the gun and this is the alternative?
Yes, the NRM government has taken Karamoja as a special priority area. That's why there is even a ministry dedicated for Karamoja affairs. Of course, the Karamoja community is largely a nomadic cattle keeping community with those traditions ranging back, and to change that behavior sometimes cannot be done abruptly. But over time, there has been systematic sensitization of the people in the Karamoja, first of all, to settle rather than being nomadic. And you had a big engagement for them to return the guns, which they did, but maybe some few remained, but they returned the majority of the guns. But also we are aware of the porous borders. Guns can still come into the country through those border points. And a lot of resources have been invested in the Karamoja area to address questions of agriculture so that there is food, because food insecurity has been one of the challenges of the area. And to ensure that people settle and they have food and the children can be educated. There are special programs for education which have been introduced, and lots of services have been extended to Karamoja. I don't know whether you've been there of recent. A Tamaka Road reaches Karamoja now, electricity reaches Karamoja, and the area has transformed. Actually, the Karamoja has undergone rapid transformation if you compare it 20, 30 years ago. Yes, there are still those pockets of insecurity, the cattle rustling, but those will be contained. And the Karamoja is moving very fast. So lots of programs to mobilize people, to create wealth, and we are dedicating special resources to Karamoja, and Karamoja will definitely transform. And I can say without fear of contradiction that the Karamoja has made very big progress in terms of socio-economic transformation. But more work has to be done, especially to fight poverty and ensure that the whole society can be transformed faster. Yes. Yeah.
Perhaps my last question in regard to security.
Yes.
In June, a high-profile personality, to be specific, the Minister for Works and former Chief of Defense Forces, General Katumba Wamala, was attacked within his own neighborhood.
Yes.
Unfortunately, his daughter and driver died, and since then we saw quite a lot of activity police making arrests. We've also had a few suspects were, killed. We can debate whether the killings were within the law. We also know that others are still missing. But since then, government has since then gone quite quiet in regard to this issue. When are we going to see, for instance, the suspects paraded in courts of law? And this feeds into the wider suspicion that many times we have many of these very serious issues of this nature playing out within the media, gallery. But we see less of that in courts of law, where we want to see the evidence, where we want to see what detectives have been able to piece together and lead to the prosecution of these people. And there's a lot of history in terms of assassinations of high-profile people. Suspects are arrested, and it turns out that actually there wasn't evidence.
First of all, the attack on General Katumba was very unfortunate, and it also followed several murders which took place 2017, 2018. You recall there was a period about 4 or 5 years ago when we lost many high-profile Ugandans. Assistant Inspector General of Police, Andrew Kawesi, Kagezi from our prosecutor, the Muslim sheikhs were killed, cold blood. We also Nareba Biriga through murders using guns. And the evidence actually available is that there was Beja Chigundu, who was gunned down here in Rubaga, and the evidence available that the people who were murdering those Ugandans are the same, are linked with the ones who attempted General Katumba. So there are those criminals.
Who are these people?
Like I said, most of these cases are being handled at the court, so at times we don't want to divulge much information. But the good thing, our security system has not been asleep. It has been working day and night. Sometimes it may not be very easy to easily apprehend these suspects, these criminals, but I think the security officers have been quite tenacious, moving slowly, but they have apprehended most of these killers, who appear to be the same in a number of murders, and definitely they will be, or they are already being tried in the courts of law. Now, part of the problem is, if I call it the problem, is you, the media. Sometimes you get excited at the time of arrests or when those incidents occur, but even you don't follow the court processes. Because if the suspects are to be taken to court, we don't call a press conference to say, today the suspects who were arrested here are being taken to court. So it is also up to the media to follow the court processes and know when they are appearing.
I think we had media houses adequately cover.
Well, maybe yes, and maybe no. Sometimes you just see hype something which is happening, and then when something else happens, you jump into it and forget. Actually, that is the psyche in Uganda. The media, you cover something, sometimes sensationally, then the following day you jump onto another, you don't even update us on what has happened to this first incident.
I think if a suspect in General Katumba Wamala's assassination attempt was arraigned before courts of law and tried, it would definitely be one of the most prominent stories in legacy media.
You should also keep track of these cases. Definitely the public is usually interested in knowing what has happened. And I want to thank the security officers and the intelligence team. Like in the case of General Katumba, they apprehended most of the people involved. Unfortunately, some were killed And yes, you raised the comment whether it was, I think they tried to resist the arrest. That's the information that we have.
Okay.
And in the process of exchange with security officers, unfortunately, they were killed. But to an extent, they also followed the arresting officers. They should have just disabled them or maimed them so that you can get information, because if you kill a suspect, then he dies with the information which would have been very useful for the investigators to get to know. But unfortunately, but also it depends on how the confrontation goes. You can't blame them, because at times they may, if you are threatened, for instance, as an arresting officer in self-defense, you may end up killing the suspect. But suspects should not be killed, because it undermines your work as an investigator, because they will die with evidence, with the information which would have helped you to unearth the motives, the people involved. And in any case, they are suspects. They are not yet tried and convicted. It could also happen that maybe they are innocent. But again, if you are innocent, why would you run away? Why wouldn't you, if they are arresting you, stand the arrest, and the courts will absolve you?
Sometimes it's natural instinct to run.
To run, anyway.
It is not conclusive that, that you're guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's unfortunate that they were killed, and we hope that those who are still at large will be caught, because Ugandans would want to know the story. Who are these fellas who were trying to kill General Katumba? They end up killing his daughter and the driver, and what was the motive? What was the motive? But all those, yes, it may take time, but they will be arraigned in the courts of law, and eventually the stories will come out.
Thank you so
you,
much.
the media, you should work with the court system and security system to keep informing Ugandans on what is going on.
Hold on to your points. We're going to take a commercial break. We've been hosting the ICT Minister and Kinkizi East Member of Parliament. So far we've discussed the issues pertaining security. We'll be back to discuss more issues in regard to vaccinations and the reopening of schools. You're watching Citizen Voices. Let's have a commercial break. Back, you're watching Citizen Voices, and our guest this evening is the ICT Minister and Kinkizi East Member of Parliament, Dr. Chris Baryomunsi. During the first session, we discussed issues to do with security, but before we discuss vaccination, I want to ask you, Honorable, it has been reported in the mainstream media that security operatives, I think specifically CMI, raided the home of the former Internal Security Organization Director General Kakabajenda. What prompted this?
Well, I don't have details, I must admit. But it could be possible that the CMI needs some information from him, because in the course of their day-to-day operations, they may land on information which is very crucial, which is important for the state. And it may not be in bad faith. As somebody who has headed the Internal Security Organization, you could be having information and they need it, but I don't have details like I've said. I will try to find out the details and maybe inform the country.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
because you see, these security agencies, they may be investigating and they find, oh, Chris Baryomunsi, maybe there is this and ABCD, so they can summon you and say, we have landed on this information. Could you give us additional clarification? So it should be normal. It should be normal, and people should not be scared. If you have the information, you give it. And you give as much as you have or you know. So, as a former head of a security agency, they could be seeking clarifications on particular issues. Yes.
Yeah. Bringing this forward, the other very important issue is the issue in regard to vaccinations, COVID-19 and vaccinations. Just a few days ago, the President gave a detailed address in regard to why some sectors have been reopened and the others we still have, you know, we haven't yet lifted, allowed them to operate. But in essence, we are aware that in the last weeks, the US government, for instance, gave us about 1 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And a few weeks ago, they gave us about 600,000 vaccines of Moderna. And the other update was we had also thousands of vaccines, I think about 57,000 that were about to expire because, you know, there was a low uptake in terms of, you know, having these inoculations. Can you give us an update of what we have in terms of vaccines and the vaccine exercise that is taking place in the country?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Ima. This is a very important topic which we need to constantly keep explaining and educating Ugandans. Before I specifically address the issue of vaccines and where we are, let me just take you back to COVID-19, where we started and where we are, just in a few minutes. We all recall that this is a new disease. It is called COVID-19 because it was first identified at the end of 2019. The virus which causes it, coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2, called severe acute respiratory syndrome, COVID virus 2, that causes this COVID-19. And here we got the first case on the 21st of March, 2020. And you recall that was a few days after the president had announced a number of measures, basically what we will call lockdown, and a string of measures. Of course, the disease was new, and the measures were quite tough on our day-to-day life. But we went through, because on the 18th of March is when the president announced, and WHO just a week earlier on 11th March had declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. So there was panic across the globe about a new disease. So from March through May, June, July, August, September, that's when we saw the world brought on its knees, with the European countries like Italy and many of those countries losing many people, countries like the USA losing many people, Brazil, later on India. It was a global crisis. And the countries were using lockdown measures to contain, because the science of this virus had been understood. But also at the same time, the scientists went to the laboratories to test and see whether they can come up with a vaccine. And earlier this year, there was a positive response from the scientists. They had tested several vaccines, and they underwent what we call emergency approvals by WHO and other authorizing institutions, and vaccines came into play, mainly beginning February and March this year. And especially I think in March, that's when we got the first doses here in Uganda. And a number of Ugandans started receiving the jabs. There has been a lot of politics and economics and dynamics regarding vaccines. It's a global debate. One of the key issues has been that, of course, it is the Western pharmaceutical companies that were able to come up with these vaccines. And because of the panic COVID-19 had caused, many of the countries in the Western world paid upfront for most of the first doses. So you find
also said that we're going to make On
Yes,
vaccine.
the process is on. I will comment on it later. So,
But the scientists in the West say it's as hard as taking human beings to the moon. Do we have?
no.
Do we have?
The scientists, the West, are not necessarily more intelligent than us.
I didn't. Say,
Maybe the facilities may not be as well developed, but in terms of the knowledge and ability and the competences, our scientists can make these vaccines, and they are making progress, and eventually they will make them. So what happened was, one, of course, at the beginning, few doses were being produced, but because of the global panic in the world, a number of countries, especially those which are resource rich, paid for the vaccines, even for more than what they needed. And the African countries suffered when it comes to access to these vaccines. So there was even a hoarding, so there was a concentration of vaccines in the global north. And Africa especially suffered a setback in terms of accessing these vaccines. Like in Uganda, when we sat in parliament, we voted money. We put 560 billion shillings dedicated for purchase of vaccines, but you could not easily order for vaccines to come into the country. We have placed orders, but you place orders, they tell you, wait, we shall tell you the date when we can deliver. There is rationing. You have money to buy
vaccine nationalism.
a number of doses, but they tell you, no, we can for now give you this number. So this vaccine nationalism, it's a debate that we have been having, and it has been a challenge, because people say, why are you only receiving donations? Why are you not buying? It's because it has been difficult to buy. Even as a country, it became difficult. We have now to pass through COVAX facility, like we have placed orders through COVAX. COVAX is an arrangement of different agencies, including WHO, to enable and address issues of equity and access. So we placed orders through COVAX, we have placed orders through the African Union, but as a country it has been difficult for you to go to a manufacturer or to a country and you buy.
So to bring this forward,
now to bring us speed, because of that, in most African settings, including Uganda, we still have to rely on the SOPs and the public health preventive measures, like physical distancing, putting on masks, washing our hands with soap, sanitizing, lockdowns, because those are the preventive tools that we have. We've been, over the last few months, getting doses of vaccines, but they are still inadequate. Up to now, we have vaccinated maybe up to 1.3 or 1.5 million Ugandans, those who have got at least the first jab, and less than a million, maybe 600,000, have got 2 doses. The numbers are still small. We have set a target to vaccinate up to 22 million Ugandans, but you can see we haven't even reached 2 million. So that justifies why we still have to lock down, why we still physically distance and all these measures. Now, our targets, one is to vaccinate up to 22 million Ugandans, and if we attain that, then life can return to near normal. Like you see in most of the Western countries, those who have vaccinated up to 70% of their populations, people are now returning to normal.
Football stadiums and all
the stadiums are open, prayer places are open, because you have protected the population. But as long as the proportion of Ugandans who are vaccinated remains low, we have to remain with these basic preventive measures. And that's why you will find schools are still closed. That's why we are limiting the numbers of those to go to prayer places, the churches, and Ugandans need to appreciate. And we are tagging the opening of this space to vaccination. Now, like the schools, I know there is anxiety in the public about opening of schools. We've been discussing this. And the president recently, when he addressed the country, he gave the timelines. And we have said we are going to open, starting with universities and tertiary institutions, beginning in November. Why? In our plan to vaccinate Ugandans, we also have priority groups which we think if they are vaccinated, that will help to halt the transmission of COVID. People like those above 50 years, aged, people below 50 years but have some sicknesses, like say diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, HIV/AIDS, sickle cell disease, those are high-risk groups. People like teachers, because we have to open schools and we want teachers vaccinated. The students who are above 18 years also are now a priority group, and now to begin with, the university students and those in tertiary institutions. On the health workers, security officers, those are the people we have prioritized, and the number comes to like 4.8 million Ugandans. So our thinking is that yes, we open schools, but we first vaccinate those high priority groups so that in the community there is some protection which we have created. And right now, as the president communicated, we have about 2 million doses of vaccines available already, and by December this year, actually the end of November to be exact, we shall have received about 10 million more doses to make it 12 including the 2 that we already have. And the 12 million doses can vaccinate more than 6 million. Because of those 1.3 million Johnson & Johnson, where you get a single shot. A single shot is enough for you as a full dose. So that means 1.3 million doses means 1.3 million people. Then the rest, you get 2 doses a person. So by December, we should have received up to 12 million doses, and we should have vaccinated over 6 million. And that's why we're saying in November, we can safely open universities and other tertiary institutions. And then more vaccines will be coming, and by January, we open the rest of the schools. We have a plan. We think by June next year, we should have received sufficient doses to cover the 22 million Ugandans, because we have money, we have placed orders. For instance, we placed an order for 9 million doses through COVAX facility. Johnson & Johnson has also said they can give us up to 9 million. So we are going to get many more doses of vaccines and vaccinate Ugandans. If we reach the target of 22 million, then we can now open most of the spaces.
Honorable, there's been that combustible debate around schools reopening.
Yes.
And people have compared, have said, well, how about Tanzania, how about Kenya and Rwanda, where the schools have been open? Have you done an empirical study to establish which one of the two is the lesser evils? Keep schools closed, many young girls getting pregnant and all these terrible things happening. And 2, there's also an assumption that because the kids are out of school, then there are means to control. They can't, spread the virus to their, elderly parents. But we've been having the elderly parents moving in very crowded markets like Chikugo, congregating in crowds and all these kind of things. Did you carry out a study to see to draw your conclusion that closing schools is safer than keeping them open?
Yes, all these phenomena are being studied and assessed. And we don't want to necessarily jump onto a bandwagon simply because Kenya has opened, we open, or Tanzania has never closed. We also don't close, because the stories from some of those countries are not necessarily exciting. And we have had waves of COVID-19. There was a talk show and somebody was saying, oh, South Africa has had 4 waves, as if that is something to be proud of. For us, we would want to contain this COVID-19 reduce the risk, minimize the number of deaths so that we don't lose Ugandans. So we've been studying all this, and we think we are taking a safer path. Without mentioning countries, you need to take interest in what is going on in some of these countries which just opened. People die, they don't even report to WHO, they conceal the figures, and we wouldn't want to take that path simply because we want to appear smart and opening schools. So for us, we are a little bit careful. We are going to be a little bit methodical, and we respect science and see that we reduce the risk that once we open schools, then we have minimized or eliminated risks. Just look at what happened last time when we opened the schools. Children started falling sick, and the teachers as well, and the managers of these schools, especially private schools, kept quiet, withdrew that information from government and the public. By the time we realized, our children were sick in hundreds. I think what helped that the COVID-19 seems not to cause serious disease among young people. It can infect them, but doesn't put them down. Although some young people have died, but it tends to affect and cause sickness in those of higher ages. But what happened was we closed these schools, and I think we also didn't manage the transportation of children and reunion of the children with the parents very well, and a number of children killed their parents when they went back. We witnessed this in the second wave in May, June, early July, and we have sad memories of what happened. So yes, we may rush to open our schools. It may appear fashionable, yes, but we would want to minimize the risk. We would want to create an environment where our teachers are safe, where the workers within the school are safe, and also our learners, our children are safe. Because schools are places of big congregations. You find a school has 2,000 students, 3,000, and they congregate in one place. And you see, this is a disease which is transmitted from one person to another, especially if you are congregating. That's why we're having 100 people sick, 150 children sick in a school. And a number of schools are day schools. So, meaning that if you get an infection in one child, this child within a short time can infect hundreds of children in the school. And these being, some of them being day scholars, once they go home, yes, they may not fall sick to the extent of being hospitalized as children, but now they will infect their parents, and then you go into another wave. So we're just being careful, but I'm sure once we get the vaccines and vaccinate the population and open the schools, yes, I know our children have lost time, but they will catch up. They will catch up.
One, as you are aware, Honorable, the pandemic has roiled the economy in many sectors.
Yes.
The SMEs sales cratered and they collapsed. But one of those that stands out are the private, institutions.
Yes.
The folks who have been running schools, and so many of them are facing foreclosure from the banks. But you've been a bit, you've cared less about their situation, and yet they provide a very important role in terms of educating our young people. Is there a way UDB can come in to look after the interests of this group in terms of providing long-term loans that they can be able to, so that they can recover?
Yes, first of all, this COVID-19 and the measures instituted to control it have definitely had very harsh implications on businesses And almost everybody has been impacted negatively by COVID-19 and its attendant measures to contain it. And of course, private schools, like other private businesses, have suffered. So we are aware and we feel for these private schools, the owners, and other private businesses. And we have discussed this as government through cabinet and other platforms of government. For instance, the most recent discussion we had in the cabinet was about schools, because we know, for instance, that a number of schools had acquired loans from our commercial banks, and then the schools closed, and the banks are pouncing on the school managers and owners to pay back, when actually the schools have been closed and they are not earning. And we have instructed the Minister of Finance and the Governor Bank of Uganda to sit with the commercial banks and have an engagement on how these owners of schools and other private business people can be cushioned, can be helped, because it is also immoral. You give me a loan, you know I have a school, I probably put up a structure or invest it in the school, and the school closes, I am not earning anything, and then you come and say you want to sell the school or you want to imprison me when I'm not the one who brought COVID. So we have already set up a government system to engage the banks to see how the loans can be restructured. We have even said, should the discussion is fail, we should find other ways of assisting. So that discussion is there. Maybe we may not have articulated it very strongly to the public, but that discussion within the government is there. And the same with the landlords and the tenants, the people who are constrained because of rent. Somebody is not working, is at home, and then the landlord is saying, I am evicting you, or you must pay rent for this month. All that discussion is being taken.
In just a minute, as we wrap this up, as you're aware, COVID has battered the economy.
Yes.
And our youths, they are yearning for opportunities for jobs. We are right at the doorsteps of the fourth industrial revolution, where we have artificial intelligence, robotics, and all these kind of things. Uganda has the second youngest population, which is a very important demographic dividend. How can we tap into that? And yet we see retrogressive policies in regard to taxes, fiscal policy, where you've put a tax on internet, where Facebook is closed. Where are the opportunities for young people as we come out of this very difficult situation?
Like
just in a minute.
We have the biggest segment of our population being young people, and what countries with that demographic structure are advised is take advantage of that youthful population in order to tap into the demographic dividend. And therefore, it's an opportunity to have many young people. And we have progressive policies and laws. That's why you see we put the dedicated funds to the youth. You have heard of this in yoga, this parish development model where the youth are prioritized. We don't have time to go into it, but we are conscious of that fact that we have many young people, and we must bring them into production so that they become an asset to the country rather than liability. Now, in terms of ICT, the sector where I belong, even this afternoon I was just discussing with an investor who is going to put resources in boosting what they call business process outsourcing, BPOs. And we are now going to start training, because we have young people, they are educated, they have skills. They have skills, engineers, doctors, auditors, insurance specialists, all these. And one way of creating jobs is, for instance, to connect them to outside opportunities. where you can audit a farm which is in Canada or US or Australia when you are locally based here. We have opened the center here in Nakawa, an incubation center. We are going to train these young people where we're going now to link them. Yes, the BPOs are going on, but we want now to multiply them and then provide employment for these young people using ICT. Issues of Facebook, yes, we are discussing with Facebook. There were reasons and issues regarding our relationship with Facebook, but discussions are ongoing to see how we resolve those very issues.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister for ICT and Kinkizi East MP. We've been discussing a number of issues, including security, the education sector, and vaccinations in regard to trying to control the COVID pandemic. I've been your host, Emmanuel Mutaiziwa, and thank you for watching Citizen Voices. Till next time, have a pleasant evening.